we'll talk briefly about that as we go. But subsequently, in more recent years, each one of these elements that were previously subsumed by these empires starts to emerge as independents in history. 1906 Iran, 1921 Afghanistan, 1922 Egypt, also Iraq, both emerged in that year, Turkey, Lebanon, Syria in 1938, 1946 Jordan, 47 Pakistan is created in effect as a Muslim concession to create the next day they freed India. And then, of course, Israel in 1948. It's interesting that each of these elements that were subsumed by this stream of empires is now emerging as independent fragments in our present scene. Egypt, of course, being formerly part of the Ptolemaic region, and the rest of these part of Seleucus, if you will. So now we have in the Middle East today then these players, of course. We've got Israel, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. We're going to focus on those and get those a little bit in the context in terms of their history, but also where they stand today. And of course Turkey, which is unique in that it's a NATO member, and that carries some interesting implications. Now the first one we'll look at, of course, is Iraq. Every day we find new conjectures as to how and when it's going to be triggered. And we're dealing here with high-tech combatants on both sides. Let's remember that this is the region of the Tigris River. This is the region of the Tigris and the Euphrates, these fabled rivers that have their origin in the book of Genesis. And as we talk about the players, we'll overlook a nation that's been disenfranchised, a nation that is aspiring to be independent but has never been given the opportunity, the Kurds. And we have about 50% of them in Turkey, we have 25% of them in Iran, about 17% in Iraq. A disenfranchised people in each of those states, and but an interesting player in the final scenes. When you read about the Medes, many scholars believe the Medes is the ancient name for what we call today the Kurds. But let's take a look at Iraq today. Their troops are about almost 500,000 active with about 650,000 reserves. They have about over 2,000 Soviet tanks of all the various kinds. They have over 300 aircraft, although less than half are operational by our understanding. And the naval is not significant. But they do have advanced technologies. This is not a third world country. This is a very, very advanced group. The no-fly zones continue to be monitored. The CIA has had earmarked $97 million to have Saddam Hussein overthrown and has yet to succeed. The UN inspection non-compliance continues. Terrorist support, open terrorist support continues. US and British airstrikes continue. They have strategic weapons available, over 1,000-mile ballistic missiles. Atomic, biological, and chemical weapons seem to be well evidenced, even though, since with the exile of the inspectors, accurate information is difficult to obtain. So Iraq is a subject of a lot of speculation. We'll come back to the big picture in a minute. Let's move westward and take a look at Syria. This also is the scene of the Tigris. The Euphrates is really the primary river in Iraq. The Tigris has its path through Syria. And it is the seat of the earliest civilizations, Assyria, Babylon, and then, of course, Persia, Greece. And the Greek Empire, of course, as we indicated, broke up into 4 parts that Rome, of course, ultimately absorbed. But we're going to focus on Seleucid and Ptolemy here in a minute. And 1938, they become an independent nation. What everybody has overlooked as they scream about Israel and its so-called occupied territories, that Syria blatantly, simply annexed Lebanon without a peep from the press or the UN or the rest. And their military strength, again, is substantial. 1/3 active and another 400,000 reserves. They have almost 5,000 Soviet tanks. Their artillery is substantial. Their aircraft numbers about 2,500, and they have on order $2 billion of new fighter planes from Russia. And their strategic weapons, they have a substantial ballistic missile arsenal with weapons provided from North Korea, which not only sells the missiles but also is a major supplier of biological weapons to the Middle East. And so they're a small but formidable people. Now, Jordan is a fictitious country created in 1946 by the British. They took this land that had been earmarked by the UN for a homeland for Israel, peeled off most of it, and created this state of Transjordan. And we won't talk a lot about its military significance. As a military player, it's not that heavy. But I want to call your attention to a very bizarre prophecy in Daniel 11, verse 41. Speaking of the Antichrist, or the person we often call the Antichrist, he shall enter into the glorious land, that's Israel, and many countries shall be overthrown. But then we have this strange annex to that statement. But these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom, Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. Ammon, Edom, and Moab are the biblical names for the region on the map that today we call Jordan. So for some reason, unexplained in the scripture, when the Antichrist makes builds his strength, for some reason this region escapes his thumb. We speculate that it's probably to give a place for the remnant to flee to Petra and so forth, but that's our conjecture. Okay, let's move on. We have, of course, Egypt, major player. A few years ago, they added the Hawk of Saladin to their flag, but in any case, they are one of the largest and best equipped armies in the region. They have almost 500,000 active troops and 250,000 in reserve, almost 4,000 tanks, most of these U.S. They have the license, I believe, to manufacture the M1A1 Abrams tank. They have almost 2,000 aircraft, and these are primarily U.S., and about 12,000 naval troops, a couple of subs and a destroyer. But they are developing. We just recently, satellite reconnaissance has indicated, both U.S. and Israeli satellite reconnaissance a few days ago has confirmed they have substantial biological warfare and also nuclear programs proceeding. And so let's take a look at the big gorilla on the block that is really overlooked by our policies. We tend to regard Saudi Arabia as a partner. Everybody asks, what is that writing on the flag? And that is that there's no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. So they are very, very committed, obviously, Islamic. They put the sword on their flag not too many years ago. Troops are not that substantial, but still substantial. 1,000 tanks, not very many aircraft. Naval forces, not that substantial. But here's the big surprise. Recently, they discovered through satellite reconnaissance that they have one of the most advanced missile programs in the region, recently purchased from the Chinese. And I'll show you a little bit more about that. And they also have access to nuclear weapons from Pakistan. In the middle of Saudi Arabia, there's a place called El Salil, which is a missile base. We now know that there's something like between 20 and 30,000 Chinese technicians installing 120 CSS-2 missiles. They have 12 launchers. Each one of these CSS-2s can carry 3 nuclear warheads each. Now you say, well, wait a minute, didn't Saudi Arabia sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty back in 1990?